All right, so at this point, really, we're just continually kind of doing what we were doing before, right? I'm not really going to do anything new in terms of concepts or ideas. It's just more going to kind of take what we have here a little bit further, right, in terms of tools and techniques. So that's kind of where we're at with that. I just wanted to kind of finish some of this stuff off, add a little more work to it. So yeah. So at this point, right, we need to do things like bridging or even new face from edges, right? We haven't seen that in a little while, but that can be quite useful, right? So in certain instances, you might see, like, say, a face open here, right? And of course, you could bridge those, but remember, you could also just fill a hole, right? Remember, if you go to 2 for edge, right, because 2 is edge select, right? It's today's quiz, edge select, right, 2. Particularly if you're in industry compatible, right? Edit, preferences, key map, make sure that industry compatible is turned on, right? At this point, most of you guys should have that turned on, but I'm a big fan of industry compatible over the default Blender. So, anyways, if we go to 2 for edge mode, right? Remember, you could double left click on an edge, right? If it's anywhere else on a mesh, if you double left click on an edge, right? We can actually see that that kind of selects an edge loop for us, right? Oh, can I see your green check? So, so double left click, right? There we go. Now let's select an edge loop. Now, at this point, right, one of the things that we could do is we can also do it on border edges, right? When we've got a hole here. So remember, we actually, in some instances, have a hole, right? Like right here. Now, of course, I can just select 2 edges, and I can bridge those, right? So if I just select one edge and one edge opposite, and I right-click, I could bridge edge loops. And then, of course, if I double left-click on an edge, it selects all the edge loops for that hole, right? Remember, double left-click on an edge works for border edge loops also. And then I could do right-click, new from face, right? We saw this a bit earlier. It's kind of one of our earlier videos for this ship. Remember, right below bridge edge loops is new face from edges. That will actually create a new face for these edge loops that are, this edge loop that's selected. You see how that creates and kind of fills in a little triangle there, right? So remember, we have that, and of course I can, move for the W for move, middle mouse button to move a little bit, and view. And we can keep moving the shapes around, right? And of course, you can see I've kind of got a hole up here as well. Now, this, of course, bridge could work on as well, right? So if I go to 2 for edge mode, remember, Q is your quick key for select tool, right? Q is your quick key for select tool. So if I was to just kind of select 2 edges, right? Opposite, opposite, kind of a single one there that's not selected. You see how that can actually right-click bridge edge loops, bridge. That does leave us the triangle there, though. So we might actually find that it's better to connect differently, right? So it's kind of one of those things where you have to think about where you want everything to go as you're building, right? So I might want to take these 2 edges to these 2 edges, right? And right-click bridge edge loops. You see how that kind of creates more of a normal flow through there, right? These quads keep going through to here. That does leave us a triangle there, but sometimes, like, try, right? Kind of try it, see if you don't like that. If a triangle here probably wouldn't be as good as here, right? So this is where this is going to be different for each of your models, right? There's certain things I want you to have the same as my ship, in particular kind of the engines and be using extrude border edge out there. Should be curvy, right? But you do have some control over exactly kind of how the shape's going to go, how these edge loops flow and meet each other, right? But I'm just trying to give you some examples in video and in lecture of, I tried those and I'm like, nope, I don't want the triangle here, right? The triangle here, creating kind of like a 5-star there is going to pull a little bit, the star we had there is going to be a little bit weirder than this is, right? So I'd rather have the triangle here. Now that does mean, of course, I could, go to 2 for edge mode, double left click on one of those edges on the hole, right click, new face from edges. And now I have a triangle here, but you kind of notice how I feel like I could almost take this edge, this triangle, and just continue it up through here. So sometimes you fill a hole in like that only to then allow you to delete this edge. Right? So I new face from edges to kind of create this triangle there. But I'm looking at this triangle edge. I'm like, man, you know what? I could really afford an extra edge here just to make this flow better. Right? Remember, we have this thing called stars. Right? See this vertex right here? I went to 1 for vertex mode. That was yesterday's quiz. And you see how there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 edges coming out of this? That's a 6 star. You notice how it kind of pinches and pulls a little weird sometimes? Right? You always want to try to avoid really big stars if you can, particularly on curved sections of a mesh, right? If it's a big star on the top of a cylinder or sphere, not usually too much of a problem. It can be a little bit for sculpting if you're doing some sculpting on the top of a cylinder, but generally you just would make the star really, really small, like the polygons around it really small, or just make it all quads. But generally we don't want to have a lot of big stars on most of our mesh, right? Particularly if it's got a lot of curvature, if it's going to animate like a character creature. The bigger the star, it's kind of like an n-gon, right? It's not like they're inherently bad. It's just that there's too many edges going to one area, so it makes it more difficult to get the shape you want. If it's going to animate, it can animate less predictably. So generally, just like we like to prefer modeling with a lot of quads, it's a good idea to not have a lot of huge stars on your meshes also. Obviously, certain areas are naturally going to have some 5 stars and some 3 stars, and if your model's not made of those, it's usually fine, right? If they're there kind of naturally. But this is just a little too much. But remember, that's a star. It's not a polygon. It's a vertex with a certain amount of edges coming out of it. It looks like a star. Sometimes you'll hear this called a high valence, right? Vertex. I've heard them called spider webs, right? I've heard a lot of people say different names. I hear stars the most often, and I like it because they look like a star, right? But just like we don't want really big n-gons for most of our mesh stuff, we don't really want a lot of big stars. So I'm going to go to 2 for edge. Select this edge right here, right? Kind of see how the triangle's going here? Now this is more for your general knowledge, right? Like you might not even need to do this. So some of what we're seeing now is just kind of problem solving, right? If you need it, you can do this. So remember, delete on your keyboard will bring up options for deleting here. Now in this case, I want to delete an edge. Now of course I can delete a regular edge here, but see how when you do delete edge, it actually gets rid of the polygons? So for me, when I delete, I actually dissolve edges. You notice how I have a quick key for faces and dissolve edges? Because I use those a good amount, right? Those are the 2 big things besides delete object that I use. Remember, if you need to, right-click on a tool, and you could add a shortcut, or in this case, change one. I already have one here, but if you don't have a shortcut, it'll just say add shortcut down here with this kind of little weird pseudo hashtag kind of loopy thing, right? In this case, I can just change shortcut, and I can say hold down Control Delete, right? And dissolve edges, Control Delete. And you see, dissolve edges works much more the way we want it to. It dissolves that edge while leaving the polygon there. Right? So when you actually delete edges, it's really better to dissolve edges, right? So one more time, when you hit delete, use dissolve edges, right? Whether it's an edge or an edge loop. Works a lot better. So you want to use dissolve edges. And in this case, you can see how now I've got an n-gon here, but it kind of basically looks like this edge loop could kind of continue on through up here, and that's exactly why I got rid of that edge, because I'm like, oh, it's a triangle here, but if I just add a little bit more through here, that's awesome. So I go to loop cut, right? Remember, loop cut works based off of the perpendicular, right? So I'm over this edge with my cursor. And I realize sometimes it's a little hard to see from your angle in the viewport here. At least from my angle it is. But remember, it goes perpendicular. Remember, that's kind of where edges meet at a right angle. So in this case, I want to add the edge loop through here, right? I want an extra edge right there. Now that does leave us with an edge and an edge here, and it kind of looks like there's a missing edge there. So we can go to 1 for vertex, and I can select these 2 vertices. Now, I haven't used this tool in a little while, but remember, we did see it on our room, right? Connect vertex pairs. So we actually do have experience with this tool. We don't use it that much. I don't use it that much personally, but I use it sometimes, right? Remember, go to vertex mode, right? One for vertex. Select that vertex and that vertex because there's an edge missing between there. Right-click, because that brings up your context menu, right? Right-click always brings up your context menu. In this case, it's for vertex, points, right? And you see kind of a couple down is an area called connectvertexpairs. Connectvertexpairs. What that does is it makes an edge between those vertices so that now this section is all quads. And you see how that shape just flows smoother through there? There's a point where you've got too many edges coming into one vertex, and it starts to pinch the shape in weird ways. It's harder to get the exact shape you want. So remember, we're really trying to avoid really big stars. Some 5 stars like this one, some 3 stars, those are generally going to be on some parts of your models, right? It's not the end of the world if you've got those. But we could see that that was a kind of a neat way to show how we could fix that stuff. Right? And then I can just kind of move some of these vertices or edges around just to kind of get a slight smoother shape through here. So remember, you can always kind of keep working on your shape a little bit, just tinker with it. You see how there's now a full edge loop that goes all the way through there? And now you can see we're kind of getting the full cockpit kind of closed up here, right? So you can see at this point, I'm really not doing any new tools, right? It's just new face from edges, it's bridge. We haven't seen connectvertexpairs in a little while, but we did see it on our first project, right? So good to see that that's there and available, right? But you can see that this is mostly just kind of me building and bridging to connect all this stuff up. So of course we could do it in the front here as well, right? We kind of have the 2 edges here. Kind of want to probably finish this up a little bit. So 2 to 2. Remember, with your bridge tool, it should always be the same number, same number. It doesn't have to be 2 to 2. It could be 3 to 3, 4 to 4, 5 to 5, 1 to 1. But it should be same number to same number. Also, you'll notice how they're separate selections, right? These 2 are on their own. These 2 are on their own. There's nothing that's kind of connecting them. If I selected this whole edge loop, bridge is not going to work because it's a fully contained edge loop. So I can just right-click, right? Because right-click brings up your context menu. In this case, it's edge. Bridge edge loops. There we go. And then, of course, I could double left click because now it leaves us a small little hole with a triangle. I can just double click on one of those edge loops on the hole. Right click, new face from edges, right? That's below bridge edge loops. And there we go. Now, in this case, you notice how that triangle really isn't hurting our shape too much? You heard some people say meshes should always be quads all the time, and that's not bad guidance. You really should have your mesh be primarily and mostly quads, particularly if it's a character creature, if it's got a lot of curvature, right? But triangles in and of themselves are actually pretty reliable, predictable polygons, right? So you really, with the triangle, have to ask yourself, is it actually hard to shape? Is it creating a weird shape there? If it's not, you're probably okay with one triangle on the kind of nose of the ship, right? N-gons tend to be far more problematic than triangles or quads. If you have a mesh made of all triangles, though, it's really hard to model with. So, like I said, I have a strong quad bias. You should have a strong quad bias, right? Polygons with 4 vertices. The occasional triangle is not going to kill you, though, right? Particularly if it's not doing anything weird for shape. If the shape is weird because of the triangle, then you don't want it. If it's working, you're probably okay. So in this case, that triangle is really not going to cause us any problems. The shape's working well there. But you really don't want a lot of triangles in your mesh, right? You really don't want a lot of triangles. Okay. So kind of a little bit more, just kind of how we were to fill those up, right? And then, of course, we can kind of see how there's kind of this section of the back that starts to need to be filled up, right? And once again, we can see that we do have kind of a decent amount of geometry here if we want. But we are going to start to run into a slight problem here where if I do 2 edges to 2 edges, right, we have 1 edge here on this side, but 2 edges there. So it does kind of create a bit of an imbalance for us that we have to think about. So I have to ask myself, well, what do I want to do with that, right? Do I want a triangle somewhere in here that terminates there? That might work for us. In fact, I kind of think that will work here. We can always kind of move it around later on. Sometimes I'll just put a triangle in there temporarily and then later on I'll try to fix it out. Usually not too hard, though. In this case, probably one of the easiest ways to do that would be to go to 3 for face, select this face right here, right? Delete faces. And then I can go to loop cut, right? Put a loop cut right in there. That now puts us in the position where I can kind of grab these 2 edges to these 2 edges. Right click, bridge edge loops. Now remember, your bridge edge loops, just like all your tools, has options. The bottom left corner, right? If I click on that bridge edge loops options, it brings this up. And remember, there is number of cuts, kind of about midway down. I can bring that up a little bit. In this case, see how it's got a bit of curvature to it. So in this case, we have to start to think about, well, how do I connect these up, right? How do these work for us? Well, that's where you might want to remember your merge vertices features, right? We've seen these a little bit also. So select that vertex, shift left click, right? So you see I've got 2 vertices, kind of where this hole's at. Right click, because it brings up your context menu. Way down here, you'll see there's a merge vertices feature. You can merge vertices at center. And what this does is it takes these vertices, these 2 that are, there's a hole there, takes these 2 vertices, right click, way down towards the bottom, merge vertices at center, and that welds those together. Now, of course, if I want to, I could shape this a little bit more to kind of have a little bit less of a pull there. But you see how I can actually kind of connect these up just by bridging, but also maybe a little bit of merge. And then, of course, we can even just go to 2 for edge mode again. Double left click here. So select this edge loop. Right click, new face from edges. And then we can go to vertex mode and select these 2 vertices. See how this is an n-gon. Right click, connect vertex pairs. You see how the triangle is actually working as a fairly decent termination there? That might be pulling that 5-star a little bit, but for now it's okay. We could always kind of move this triangle down here to do stuff, but I don't really want to get into that yet, right? So sometimes I'll terminate with the triangle for the moment, and then maybe move it around to somewhere else. But I feel like we're not in too bad of a place right now, and we can kind of leave it for the moment. But I just really wanted to start to get you guys to see the broader picture for this whole ship, right? That it's still mostly bridging edge loops, extruding edge loops. We start to see new face from edges a little bit more, maybe occasionally a merge vertex or a connect vertex pairs. Remember, that's just your right click to bring up your vertex context menu. You'll see there's connect vertex pairs there and merge vertices there. Connect actually makes an edge between them. Merge actually welds them, right? You saw there was a hole on the areas that I merged, and it just kind of welds that, merges it all together into one. Connect actually makes an edge between them, doesn't merge them, right? It actually makes new geometry between there. And now we can see that that's a more complete ship. I'll stop the video then.